Hello, everyone. This is JT Keating. I'm the Vice President of Product Strategy for Zimperium, and I'd like to welcome you to the third of our four-part series on different threat attacks. This is a series that we were asked to do by some customers. On July 31st, we released our global threat report, State of Endpoint Mobile Security, which, by the way, you can go watch the archive if you'd like, or you can download the report if you'd like. And it actually was, what's the state of mobile security, specifically endpoint mobile security, because that's our exclusive focus here at Zimperium. And a lot of customers, a lot of partners and prospects were saying, can you guys take us down another step? Could you go another step down on device attacks, which we did 2 weeks ago, phishing this week, and we got network attacks, and then we got malicious apps coming up. So we're taking kind of the thought process that was occurring in those, and we're going down into each one of them. And for each one of these, one of the bonus points for you guys is you don't just have to listen to me, which is huge benefit. What we're doing with each one is we have some of the most talented technical sales engineers from a mobile standpoint on the planet. And so each one of them, for each one of these webinars, I'm joined by one of them. This week, we're joined by Mark Tinker. Mark is our senior sales engineer for the Western United States. So he's got all enterprise accounts in SLED in the Western United States. So Mark, thanks a lot for joining me.
Morning, JT. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Oh, anytime. We're looking forward to it. All right, so before we dive in, a couple quick things. I did mention the threat report. I strongly encourage everybody that's trying to come up the curve on mobile threats and mobile security to follow us on our various different social channels. And it's not just because of our irascible communications director who will make sure I say that. It's because that is a place where we have a regular cadence of things that have to do with mobile security. And so it's a very, very valuable resource. So I strongly encourage that. We're going to try and make this about 20, 25 minutes max of content with Q&A at the end. We don't make up questions. So if you don't have any questions, we'll give you your time back. And so with that, and please use the Q&A section or capability if you have any questions. And then also if maybe you have any technical difficulties, because we don't use the chat feature ourselves. So with that, we're going to dive in. You can also make these slides available to anybody who wants. Today is what exactly is mobile phishing. Now, last week, again, you can go back and check our site. We made our announcement where we train our machine learning engine up in the cloud for months and months and months and months until it's very effective. Then we do all of our detection on device. We're going to talk about that. Last week, having trained our machine learning detection of phishing sites for years now, we are finally making it where it's publicly available, generally available. We are now the only mobile threat defense company that has machine learning based detection of all 4 vectors on device. So today we're going to be talking about phishing. So let's dive in. First thing is first. It's important to note, and this is now across the board, an endpoint is an endpoint is an endpoint. If you got patient data sitting on a tablet, it's no different than you got sitting on a server. Last year, we saw the sea change where before that, it was almost always mobility teams that were driving mobile security purchases. Last year, it became the endpoint security guys were the primary in almost every deal. Last year, Gartner had a hype cycle for mobile or for endpoint in mobile in 2018. This year, it's a hype cycle for endpoint security. So the fact is 60% of the endpoints accessing an enterprise today are mobile, and in most cases have no visibility whatsoever. So all the investments we've made, everything we've done has been to protect 40% of the endpoints. To make matters worse, users are the admin of these mobile devices. They decide when to patch, they decide what networks to connect to, they decide what apps to install. So it makes it just a horrific scenario for most endpoint security folks. They are absolutely under attack. Obviously, that's why we're here. A level set. We have thousands of customers worldwide now, tens of millions of endpoints deployed. 100% of our customers detect attacks. 100%. So a lot of people are like, well, I haven't heard about it. Well, if you don't have any visibility, you don't know what's happening. Those people that have put visibility on the 60% of the endpoints, 100% of them have detected attacks. So this is similar. Mark and I were kind of laughing about this yesterday. This is very similar to the FedEx logo. Once somebody shows you the arrow, you can't unsee it, right? Here, when you start looking for mobile, I mentioned following us on social media, you're going to see this stuff all over the place anyway. It's just commonplace across the board. There are 4 primary attack vectors. Obviously, we're going to dive into phishing here now, but it's important to frame this up. There's some time-tested security outages, one of which is persistence. The bad guys have always wanted to be persistent as long as possible, no matter what computing device they've taken over. In mobile, because all apps are in containers, the only way to remain persistent is to actually compromise the device. So the ultimate goal is to compromise the device. Elevate privileges, something all the stuff we talked about last week, because then you can actually not only have credentials, but you can weaponize everything along those lines. The other 3 are predominantly vectors that you can lose information and you can lose credentials, you can lose data, but they're really mechanisms to get to that persistence point. Malicious apps, we're going to talk about in a couple of weeks, basically untargeted, designed for fraud, but can deliver exploits. Phishing, we're going to dive into today. Obviously, you can lose credentials, but once a website is being loaded, you can actually deliver an exploit. Mark and I are going to talk about that here in a second. Network attacks. Now, the primary thing is this, and we've known this from the very beginning. Bad guys are very good at what they do. They're not going to drop an app in the App Store and hope somebody from, let's say they're targeting XYZ company, downloads it. That's not the way they work. They're going to set up a fake Wi-Fi network directly across from XYZ's headquarters, wait till somebody connects it, and immediately deliver an exploit based on what they know about the device. Our data shows today that 90% of targeted attacks start with the bad guys owning the network. It's the most efficient way of going after a company. So we're going to come back to that in a minute when it comes to the solution. But now what we're going to do, and this is where Mark gets to start chiming in and having some fun, so you don't just have to listen to my voice. We're going to start talking about phishing attacks. Now, first things first, why would anybody even care? Well, this just starts the conversation. According to Verizon, 90% of breaches start with a phishing attack. And 2/3 of emails are read on mobile. So just within one thread here, that one thread, and we're going to be talking about this a lot, which is corporate email, 2/3 of those corporate emails are now being read on mobile. Therefore, breaches are occurring from phishing on mobile, and it gets even worse as we dive into this. So, what is mobile phishing? This is just a baseline. Obviously, somebody's there. They might get an email, for instance, that lures them to a fake version. In this particular case, happens to be of eBay. They give up their credentials. But as I mentioned earlier, the minute that that browser processes that, it can also deliver an exploit to compromise the device. You know, Mark, can you maybe just give a little bit of a color on that second part? I think people clearly get giving up credentials, but can you give just a little bit of an idea of maybe how exploits can be delivered from a web page?
Yeah, sure, JT. So again, the whole key thing being when, there's some social engineering going on here, right? Getting somebody to attempt to log on to what appears to be a valid website, and then say after they provide the credentials, right, that web page might pop up something that says, hey, we've noticed that something on your device is outdated or out of compliance. We're going to need you to click here to download a profile or to update, and I'm doing the finger quote thing in the air thing, a particular app. So again, looking like it's coming from a valid source, that end user is going to click. And again, because they are the admin of their device, they're going to be able to install that, execute it, And then once that happens, all bets are off, because that's essentially the step that gets the bad actor persistence on the device via a full compromise.
Yeah, no, excellent, excellent. Makes a lot of sense. And to your point also, without any kind of security on that, even if a lot of this thread might be very similar in a corporate machine, generally speaking, email is the primary vector for phishing in the corporate world. A lot of corporations have invested in gateways, email gateways, and then even if a web page tried to deliver an exploit, almost every endpoint today, traditional endpoint, has anti-malware detection capabilities and the like. So here, again, with that 60%, until you have something like Zimperium, you're exposed for not only from the attack, but from the exploit, as you were talking about. But then that was just corporate email. And it's important when you start thinking about mobile phishing to realize there are some brand new vectors that come in that bypass those existing solutions, which are, again, predominantly next generation firewalls, email gateways, and endpoint security on traditional things. First one, personal email. Simple fact is, users, whether it's a corporate owned device or whether it's a BYOD, users, it's a personal device. I put it in my pocket. I put it in my purse. I mean, not my purse, I mean somebody's purse, like a Peapock's purse, whatever. But I can read a personal email and hit that website, have that device be compromised, as Mark was just talking about, walk right into the corporate headquarters, and as Mark said, all bets are off. So that all the solutions of corporate gateways and traditional endpoints in the corporation bypassed completely. Then there's the next one, and Mark, I'd love your kind of thoughts on this one. Messaging apps. The simple fact is that has nothing to do with corporate gateways or anything. So and I think SMS messaging apps, that sort of phishing is a real problem and is a focus. I mean, Mark, I mentioned one adage is persistence, right? Another adage that has been time tested as long as there's been security is land and expand. The bad guys are always going to find the weakest link in, and then they're going to go forward. Mobile devices today are the weakest link because they have no protection, they spend time outside of the network, and they're in the hands of users. But then this is a vector from a phishing standpoint that is brand new as well. I mean, do you have any kind of thoughts on the SMS messaging side of things and the delivery from a phishing standpoint?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So not from the straight phishing perspective, right? Something that's happening completely out of band of, again, any type of corporate solutions, right? If it's coming in through the SMS or the messaging function of my device, right? There's really no visibility from the enterprise's perspective into that. It could be a specific URL, again, luring an individual into a website that's getting them to download something or forcing their credentials. And then again, just kind of outside of the whole phishing thing, there are certain attacks and certain vulnerabilities in OSs that if an SMS or a WhatsApp message, right, that happened back in May, is formatted in a correct format, it just has to be placed or sent to the device. And again, if it's done correctly and the OS is vulnerable to it, that will kick off remotely the rooting or the jailbreaking of that device, the compromising of that device with no interaction whatsoever by the end user. So it can even go a step farther than just your traditional phishing as well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and we'll talk on the next slide. One of the we also start talking about the fact that mobile, these are new vectors, but mobile also makes it easier to do things in general. And one of them is the fact that when people get texts, it feels more immediate, or messaging, it feels more immediate than email. So people, a lot of times, their natural reaction is to respond quickly because messaging is supposed to be about a back and forth. But versus an email is a little bit more asynchronous time-wise, right? So personal email, totally bypass it. SMS messaging totally bypasses traditional things. Then the third might surprise people. Malicious apps. Now, we're not going to spend a ton of time on malicious apps today. That's the webinar that we're doing a couple weeks out. But we had to mention it here because, and Mark and I were talking about this, what's the definition of phishing, right? Well, as a general rule, the definition of phishing is I am mimicking an established brand in order to trick you into giving me your credentials or trick you into hitting, a site or whatever so I can deliver an exploit. But fundamentally, the idea is, I think I'm interacting with XYZ, but it's actually fake XYZ. Well, many of the malicious apps that are out there, BankBot is one that we just happen to be showing here. We've done webinars on it. They basically, users will go to a third-party app store. They'll install something. To Mark's point with social engineering, people will say, it'll say, oh, you need to accept these privileges. Okay, click yes, whatever. It elevates privileges. And especially on Android, apps can see other apps on there. On Android. So they will scan immediately and say, hey, are any one of these 600 or 700, even though it's called BankBots, it's major brands, apps on this device? Yes, XYZ is. They will go to command and control, get a template, and wait. Then the minute the user clicks on XYZ's app, it will put the template right over the top. Users give up their credentials. It actually logs the person in then, which is very altruistic of them, but it serves two purposes. One, the user is no more aware of it. It's just, they didn't even notice it happened. And two, the bad guys just validated the credentials worked. So that is a form of phishing that clearly has nothing to do with existing solutions. Now, we're going to talk about that again going forward, coming back to regular phishing. I mentioned with the messaging apps, mobile makes phishing a lot easier. Here's a top 10. And by the way, we're producing a white paper on our machine learning detection of phishing. It'll be up on the site here within the next couple of days. This information is in there with even more details. But here's just some of the things that makes mobile even easier. First of all, we talked about it. Users are in charge, smaller screens. Users do trust, no side-by-side. If, a lot of times you're like, I want to take a look. Does this look like the real eBay? That sort of thing, right? Texts are urgent. We just got finished talking about it. And texting while distracted. I see something, I'm in the middle of something, bang, I just hit it. I just took care of business. Mark, what are your thoughts about this? Is there anything, on this list that kind of jumps out at you or or anything else?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting. I think you and I may have discussed this earlier, is that there's, the big thing that's kind of making all of this possible is the addition of a transport mechanism that is outside of the corporate control, right? So being mobile, these devices go all over the place. So while they're mobile, they're using the cellular data connection, or they're using Wi-Fi, a coffee shop, an airport, a hotel, home network, whatever, right? So those traditional controls that an enterprise would have in place, right? A next-gen firewall, I think you mentioned it before, right? Some type of a NAC gateway or a proxy or something like that where, mistakenly or blindly, the enterprise is saying, yep, our corporate network is protected. And yes, it is. However, 60% of the devices that are accessing that company data are not on that network all the time. So
right.
There's a huge gaping hole there.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, they're connecting to any network. And so, and there are some, very much a minority, that might use an always-on VPN 100% of the time, and they know that they're tunneled directly back in, but that is a fraction of the users. And again, even if they had that, all those other vectors we were just talking about wouldn't be affected. So we talked about it. It's a major threat. We got these new vectors. There's new realities that make it even easier for phishing to happen. This is never intended to be a full-on product pitch, so we're not going to spend a ton of time on this, but it is important to kind of say, hey, here's an approach, and here's why it's something to consider. So coming back to this, with 90% of the attacks starting with a network attack. Said differently, this means 9 times out of 10, the bad guy owns the network. And so if the bad guy owns the network, if all of your detection is in the cloud, the first thing they do is cut off all access to the detection. So we've always believed, since we're here to deal with enterprises, not consumers, that you have to stop the #1 attack, and you need to be able to do 100% of your detection on device. Gartner is now endorsing this and saying on-device agent, better likelihood of protection persisting. This is, you know, the watered down report version. If you actually talk to the analysts over there, they'll be like, yeah, I mean, obviously, if the bad guy owns the network, you can't expect him to, you know, take you to what's going to detect him. Now, so we have one engine. It's called Z9. It detects these 4 attacks with machine learning on device. And as I mentioned earlier, we train, is what the white paper talks about, so you can learn more details when it comes out. We train up in the lab, in the cloud, against billions of data points from tens of millions of endpoints. Once the algorithms are highly efficient, those algorithms are what's put down on device. So we don't do machine learning on device. We do machine learning based detection on device. But that enables us to do detection even when the bad guy owns the network, including detecting him, terminating that, and stopping any other parts of the entire thing. There's 2 primary ways that Z9 provides protection. If you're trying to protect your device 100% of the time, like next generation antivirus or EPP for mobile, that's called ZIPS. It stands for Z Intrusion Prevention System. If, however, you have a mobile app, we have an SDK where you can drop Z9 directly inside of your mobile app. In that case, you're not trying to protect the device, you're trying to protect the app and the session that app is having. So, banking example, we have banking customers that are using Zips to protect their employees and using Z-App to protect their mobile banking users. Now, when it comes to phishing, the odds of you getting phished simultaneously with you doing a mobile banking session are infinitesimal. So the phishing protection is really a Zips focused thing. You're protecting your employees, to Mark's point, no matter what networks they're roaming in and out of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the detection is, the machine learning detection of phishing sites is done on device, but you need to feed it, right? You need to say, okay, here's a URL. One of these strengths that Zimperium has, and part of this really does come again from doing all of our detection on device, is we're the most privacy-centric solution out there. When GDPR came out, we didn't have to change the product at all, because all we had to do was say, okay, here's a GDPR setting, don't take that data, don't take that data, don't take that data. When City of New York, who's an enterprise customer, wanted to actually put out a free offering to protect the citizens of New York called NYC Secure, that is powered by Zimperium, there's 0 data that leaves the device because we don't need it, because we're doing all the detection on the device. Same thing when it comes to the phishing side. We talked about the fact that mobile devices are very personal. So any solution you have has to be privacy-centric. Okay, we have 2 primary ways that we feed URLs to the engine. One is user-initiated. Literally, you just long press and you say, hey, I want to share this and see whether or not this is bad. Okay, so in that case, it's whatever the user sends out, no problem whatsoever. Then there's always on protection, and we use what's basically an on-device VPN. URLs come in. It will do a checking right there on device. If it's bad, it'll block it, put up a thing saying, hey, this is a suspicious site, you shouldn't go there, bang. If it's not, then you're off to the races. But the key is, it's all happening on device. So there's no personal data, including browsing history or anything, that's like leaving the device. All the assessment is occurring right there on the device. So this gives 2 huge benefits. One is I'm hammering it, the privacy side. No personal data is going anywhere. Second is a policy side. We are the enterprise guys. We are without question the leader in enterprise mobile threat defense, period, for multiple reasons. One of which is the fact that we do all this on-device detection, which is the primary attack vector against enterprises. Second part is, or another part is, we have the best group policies. So we don't believe that you should turn something on for the entire company. We think you need to be able to tune based on things. So here, as you can see, an example of it would be, okay, in this case, corporate devices, we're going to say we're putting an on-device VPN. BYOD, here's URL sharing. Either way, you're still providing some protection, and it's still very privacy-centric. Finishing out real quick, I mentioned that we're the enterprise guys. Huge benefit of doing on-device detection is we don't have to lock our management console, which is called Z-Console, into one cloud solution. The guys doing cloud-based detection are all on AWS. We're fine with AWS, but we also are completely cloud agnostic. Azure, Oracle, Google. You see AWS Cloud, we are the only MTD solution that is FedRAMP authorized to operate, which is a huge advantage in that space. We interact with the largest set of UEMs, and we're the only ones that can handle multiple UEMs in a single console, a single tenant. All of our forensic data, including the phishing data, can go into whatever SIM you want. We're the only ones with a Splunk app, for instance. Behind Z-Console is a capability called Z3A, which stands for Advanced App Analysis. There's a lot of apps in your environment, we'll talk about this in the session in a couple of weeks, that are legitimate apps, but they have huge privacy and security risks in them. Maybe they're sending traffic to a foreign country, or they're unencrypting traffic. So you need to know about those as well. So with that, Mark, as we pause and see if there's any questions, is there anything that you want to add, or anything you think I missed while we're waiting to see if we have any questions?
No, I think you hit it. You hit the nail on the head, and I wanted to stress again that by having the ability to create custom policies, right? So whether it's a phishing policy or the privacy policy or the threat policy / security policy, it doesn't matter, based upon who you are, where you are, what kind of device you have, what your job function is, right? You have the ability to granularly set up those different policies and just not have a one-size-fits-all for the entire user base.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I sometimes joke that we take our approach from the old Burger King commercial, the hamburger chain, where it's like you can have it your way. We believe that you should have it your way. You have a certain cloud that you want to be on, go for it. You have a certain EMM, UAM combination, go for it. You have certain policies you want to do, as you were talking about, go for it. So, Mark, I don't see any questions. And so everybody, Mark, thank you very much for joining me, man. It's been a blast, as always. And with that, I will give everybody the rest of their day back. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.